Somewhere along the way, you stop trying to be the version of yourself you thought would earn you love. The one who always smiles, always agrees, always bends until there's nothing left to bend. You stop striving for perfection like it's a prize. You stop pretending that you're unaffected, untouched, unbothered. Instead, you begin to feel again, deeply, honestly, without shame. And though the feelings come like waves, sometimes soft, sometimes overwhelming, you no longer fear them. Because now you understand that feeling is not weakness, it's how you stay connected to yourself. It's how you stay alive. You remember how much of your life was spent performing. You remember the weight of approval, how it shaped your choices, how it filtered your voice. You remember the anxiety of disappointing others, of being misunderstood, of not being enough. And in that remembering, you begin to grieve, not just for what happened, but for everything you abandoned in the process. The dreams you silenced, the boundaries you crossed, the intuition you ignored. You grieve because now you can see it clearly. And that clarity, even when it hurts, is a gift. You begin to return, not to who you used to be, but to who you've always been beneath the roles, the expectations, the noise. You notice the way your body relaxes when you're in safe spaces. You hear the difference between your conditioned voice and your true one. You sense the quiet joy that arrives when you do something for no other reason than it feels good. You stop chasing outcomes. You start following energy. You realize that alignment isn't something you think your way into. It's something you feel your way toward. And so you slow down. Not because life demands it, but because your soul is tired. You no longer race from one task to the next, measuring your worth by how much you get done. You wake up and ask yourself, what do I need today? And for the first time, you actually listen. Maybe it's movement, maybe it's rest, maybe it's solitude, maybe it's connection. You don't judge the answer. You honor it. You let your life be a dialogue between you and your deepest self, not a performance for others to applaud. You start saying no without guilt. You stop justifying your needs. You begin to trust that if someone truly values your presence, they will respect your boundaries. You learn that love doesn't require you to betray yourself, that compassion doesn't mean tolerating harm, that kindness does not include self-sacrifice. You choose relationships that feel like peace, like exhale, like being held, not handled. And when you realize how rare those relationships are, you don't feel bitter, you feel sacred. Because now you understand your energy is a privilege, not a given. You stop living in the future. You stop replaying the past. You learn how to anchor yourself in the moment, not because it's easy, but because it's the only place your life is truly happening. You stop needing to know what comes next. You stop needing everything to make sense. You let the uncertainty be a teacher. You let the in-between be a sanctuary. You find presence in the mundane, in washing dishes and tying your shoes and breathing slowly. You realize that presence is not reserved for big, beautiful moments. It lives in the smallest ones too. You forgive yourself for staying too long, for not knowing better, for abandoning yourself in the name of survival. You forgive the version of you who didn't have the tools you have now, the one who only knew how to numb, how to run, how to please. You look at her with compassion. You thank her. You let her go. And in that release, you open the door to a new kind of self, a self who is learning how to stay, how to feel, how to choose herself without apology. You stop measuring your healing by how happy you are. You measure it by how honest you're willing to be, by how tenderly you can sit with discomfort, by how quickly you return to yourself after forgetting. You don't expect healing to be linear. You don't expect growth to be graceful. You let the mess be part of the miracle. You understand now that healing doesn't mean you never hurt. It means you no longer abandon yourself when you do. You begin to live by your own rhythm. You don't let the world's pace dictate your own. You don't wake up and scroll for validation. You don't lose yourself in the noise. You start your day with breath, with intention, with stillness. You build rituals that ground you. Tea in the morning, silence in the evening, walks in between. You don't rush the moments. You savor them. And in that savoring, life begins to feel more full. Not because anything outside of you has changed, but because you're finally here for it. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. You stop over-explaining your path. You realize that not everyone is meant to get it. Some people are only meant to witness your journey from afar. Some are only meant to be lessons, not lifelines. You stop holding on to people who only show up when it's convenient. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop excusing behavior that leaves you feeling empty. You choose reciprocity, you choose truth, you choose depth. And when loneliness comes, as it sometimes does, you don't run from it. You sit with it. You listen to what it's trying to show you. You don't fill the silence with distractions. You let it echo. You let it soften. You trust that loneliness isn't a punishment. It's an invitation, a space for recalibration, a moment to hear your own voice without interference. You learn that being alone isn't the same as being abandoned, that solitude can be a kind of medicine. You become less reactive, more reflective. You pause before responding. You breathe before reacting. You ask yourself, is this coming from my wounds or my wisdom? You don't let the past speak louder than the present. You stop projecting your pain onto others. You hold yourself accountable. You take responsibility for your patterns, not with shame, but with maturity. You're no longer looking for someone to fix you. You're learning how to hold yourself. And in that holding, you find peace, not the absence of problems, but the presence of inner safety. You know now that you can weather the storms, that you can hold both grief and gratitude, that you can feel fear without letting it lead, that you can be hurt and still be healing. You stop asking for life to be easy. You ask for it to be real. And when it is, you meet it with open hands. You stop hiding your tenderness. You stop masking your sensitivity. You let the tears fall. You let your voice shake. You let your heart break open instead of shut down. You stop pretending that strength means silence. You know now that strength is staying soft in a world that tells you to harden. That strength is vulnerability. That strength is presence. And as you soften, you begin to bloom. Not in the way the world expects, but in your own quiet, sacred way. You bloom in your boundaries. You bloom in your joy. You bloom in your rest. You bloom in the way you care for yourself. You bloom in your truth. You stop trying to be a different flower in someone else's garden. You grow where your soul feels seen. You bloom in your own soil. And that blooming, it's not for anyone else. It's for you. For the younger version of you who dreamed of this peace. For the future version of you who will look back and whisper, "Thank you for not giving up." For the present version of you who is learning, slowly and bravely, how to love herself without conditions. You are here, fully, finally. And that is more than enough. There's a kind of freedom that doesn't come from gaining more, but from needing less. Not less in the sense of scarcity, but less in the sense of clarity. You no longer crave the noise, the chaos, the constant movement that once felt like life. You no longer feel the urge to fill every space, to prove every moment, to decorate your reality with distractions. You begin to appreciate the beauty and simplicity, the kind that settles deep into your bones and brings you back to center. You begin to understand that peace isn't something you chase, it's something you create, through choice, through intention, through presence. You wake up in the morning and no longer feel like you have to perform to belong. The first breath you take feels sacred. You don't immediately reach for your phone to remember who you are through notifications. You don't seek the world's permission before you begin your day. Instead, you sit quietly. You breathe. You ask yourself not what the world needs from you, but what your soul is asking today. Some mornings the answer is stillness. Some days it's movement. Other days it's play. But no matter the answer, you honor it. Because now your life is led not by obligation, but by resonance. You begin to notice how little you need to feel content. A warm cup in your hands. A moment of silence between tasks. A walk where your mind can roam freely. A song that makes you remember something beautiful you'd forgotten. You realize that happiness doesn't live in the future. It's not behind achievement or locked in some distant outcome. It's here, it's now. It's available in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this moment. And when you understand that, everything slows. You stop sprinting, You start savoring. You stop confusing struggle with significance. You stop believing that suffering is the price of success. You stop glorifying the hustle that left you depleted, disconnected, and disoriented. You see now that your worth is not measured in exhaustion, that your value is not proven by how much you sacrifice, that you do not have to earn your right to rest. And so you rest, not just at night, but throughout the day. You rest in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you move through spaces, in the way you forgive yourself for all the times you didn't know how to pause. And when rest becomes part of your rhythm, you begin to hear things differently. You hear the way your breath has been whispering truth to you all along. You hear the way your body has been asking you to listen. You hear the longings that used to be drowned out by the roar of productivity. You start responding, not with urgency, but with reverence. You make space for what matters and you release what doesn't. You simplify, not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing presence over pressure. You're choosing depth over display. You begin to set boundaries that feel like love, not just for others, but for yourself. You stop checking your phone first thing in the morning. You stop saying yes when your energy says no. You stop letting urgency pull you out of alignment. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't hear you. You don't do it from defensiveness, but from devotion. You realize that boundaries aren't walls, they're invitations. They say, this is how I love myself. This is how I can love you too. You stop feeling guilty for protecting your peace. You understand now that peace is sacred, and not everyone is meant to hold it with you. Your relationships shift, not dramatically, but deeply. You start noticing who listens and who waits to speak, who makes room for your silence, who celebrates your growth without shrinking, who sees your light and doesn't try to dim it. You feel it in your nervous system, in your gut, in your breath. And you don't cling to those who can't meet you. You bless them and let them go. Because love without presence is a performance. And you're done performing. You become more honest, not brutally, but beautifully. You stop sugarcoating your needs. You stop diluting your truth to make it easier to swallow. You say, I'm not available for this, and mean it. You say, this doesn't feel right, without apology. You say, I love you, but I love me too, and let the silence follow. You let the chips fall. You let the real ones stay. You learn that truth may cost you comfort, but it gives you clarity, and you'll take clarity every time. You begin to understand that joy isn't just a fleeting feeling. It's a decision, a presence, a return. You find it in music, in movement, in solitude, in stillness. You stop waiting for joy to arrive after all the work is done. You find it in the middle of the mess, in the cracked open moments, in the laughter that bubbles up when you least expect it. You give yourself permission to feel joy even when the world feels heavy. You stop making joy conditional. You let it be what it is, alive, whole, holy. You start speaking to yourself like someone who matters. You don't tear yourself down for being human. You don't scold yourself for needing space. You don't shame yourself for feeling lost. You place your hand on your heart and say, I'm proud of you. Even when it feels awkward, even when no one else says it, you recognize that your inner dialogue creates your inner world. So you speak life, you speak love, you speak softness into your own name. And when fear shows up, as it always does, you don't fight it. You sit with it. You say, I see you, I hear you, but I don't have to follow you. You learn that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep moving while fear rides in the passenger seat. You don't have to kick it out. You just don't let it take the wheel. You let your values lead, your vision, your wisdom. You've earned that. You create rituals that remind you of who you are. You light candles not for decoration, but for grounding. You journal not to impress, but to listen. You walk in nature not to count steps, but to remember your place in the living, breathing web of existence. You find God in the small things, in the smell of your tea, in the softness of a blanket, in the way the wind moves through trees. You stop separating the sacred from the simple. You see that they were never separate to begin with. You start building a life that feels like you. Not the idea of you, not the version of you that others expect. but the you that lives quietly beneath all the noise. The one who loves slowly, deeply. The one who needs more silence than she lets on. The one who feels the world too much but wouldn't trade that sensitivity for anything. The one who knows that real beauty isn't flashy, it's felt, it's quiet, it's honest. And you realize you're no longer seeking permission, you're no longer waiting to be ready, you're no longer pretending, you're here, fully, finally, not perfect, not polished, but whole. And that wholeness, it's not something you found outside of yourself. It's something you uncovered, something you remembered, something you came home to, and it's enough. It's always been enough. There's a moment in life, not marked by celebration or applause, where you wake up and realize something powerful. You no longer need to be someone else to feel worthy. It doesn't come with grand clarity or a booming voice of truth. It arrives quietly after countless small moments where you finally chose yourself. Not out of defiance, not from rebellion, but from remembrance. You remember who you are beneath all the roles, the masks, the expectations. You start to see clearly that the person you've been trying to become was already there, waiting for your permission to step forward. You look in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, you don't pick yourself apart. You don't scan your face for flaws or your life for what's missing. Instead, you pause. You look into your own eyes and recognize the soul that has walked through storms, who has carried silent burdens, who has grown in the dark. You don't rush past that reflection. You hold it. You say thank you. Not just for surviving, but for staying. Staying with the truth even when it shook everything. Staying with the healing even when it hurt. Staying with the becoming even when it was lonely. You realize that self-worth isn't something you earn. It's something you uncover. Something that was always there but got buried under layers of not enough. You stop measuring your value and productivity. You stop comparing your timeline to someone else's highlight reel. You stop needing your life to look like success to be meaningful. Instead, you begin to feel what it's like to live in alignment, to walk through the world with an inner peace that doesn't require constant proving. You begin to breathe differently, not shallow and tight, but deep and full. You find beauty in your own rhythm, the way you move slowly through your mornings, the way you pause before saying yes, the way you choose softness in a world that demands urgency. You see now that slowing down isn't laziness. It's sacred. It's healing. It's returning. You're not here to be a machine. You're not here to keep up with systems that don't see your soul. You're here to live deeply, honestly, and fully. And that kind of living can't be rushed. You begin to redefine what it means to be strong. Not as unshakable, not as unfeeling, but as someone who knows how to sit with discomfort without abandoning themselves. As someone who cries when the emotion rises, not because they're weak, but because they're present. As someone who rests when their body calls for it, who says no when their peace is at risk, who asks for help without shame. This kind of strength isn't celebrated loudly, but it's the kind that transforms you from the inside out. You stop begging life to be easier and start asking yourself to be more gentle. You stop waiting for the storm to pass before you allow yourself to feel joy. You dance in the rain. You laugh even when your heart is still healing. You hold grief and gratitude in the same breath. You learn to make space for all of it. The contradictions, the complexities, the both and of being human. You no longer fear your depth. You embrace it. You let it shape your days, your relationships, your dreams. You find yourself craving honesty more than comfort. You'd rather hear the truth that hurts than a lie that soothes. You speak more openly now, not to be heard, but to be real. You share your wounds not to bleed, but to let others know they're not alone. You show your softness not to gain sympathy, but to invite connection. You don't wear your heart on your sleeve recklessly, but you don't hide it behind armor either. You protect your energy, but not at the cost of closing your heart. You learn that boundaries and openness can coexist, that discernment and compassion are not opposites, that love, when held properly, is both tender and wise. You begin to fall in love with the simple things, the taste of fresh fruit, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the silence that wraps around you in the early morning. You stop needing everything to be grand to feel meaningful. You realize now that joy isn't in the destination, but in the way you move through each moment. You stop rushing through your days just to reach the next goal. You slow down enough to notice your life, really notice it. And when you do, it surprises you how much goodness has always been there, patiently waiting for your attention. And even in the hard days, the ones that feel heavy, when the old wounds ache and the future feels uncertain, you don't spiral like you once did. You sit with yourself. You speak gently. You say, "This is hard, but I'm here." And you mean it. You don't abandon your inner child. You hold her. You don't shame the fear. You meet it with compassion. You don't demand perfection. You offer patience. You realize now that healing isn't a destination. It's a relationship, a lifelong conversation with your soul. And you've stopped asking others to give you what you've finally learned to give yourself. Validation, love, presence. You know now that when someone sees you, it's not because you made yourself visible. It's because you were never hiding from yourself to begin with. You're no longer available for love that costs your peace. You no longer stay in spaces that require you to forget yourself. You'd rather be alone in your truth than surrounded in your performance. You trust your intuition more. You don't need 100 reasons to leave a room that drains you. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't argue with your body when it whispers no. You listen, you trust, you follow. You don't need to explain what makes you feel safe. You know now that not everyone will understand your path, and that's okay. You're not walking it for applause. You're walking it for alignment, for peace, for truth. You start dreaming differently, not from a place of lack, but from abundance. Not to escape, but to expand. You dream of mornings filled with silence, afternoons spent creating, evenings wrapped in softness. You don't chase dreams that don't include your soul anymore. You build a life that reflects your values, not society's expectations. You no longer need your life to look impressive. You just want it to feel real. You want depth, intimacy, creativity, rest, truth, and you're willing to let go of anything that doesn't support that vision. And when setbacks come, as they always do, you don't see them as signs to stop. You see them as part of the rhythm. You rest, you reflect, you reset, but you don't give up. Not on yourself, not on the life you're building, not on the dreams that still hum in your chest. You're not as fragile as you once believed. You've discovered that even when you bend, you don't break. You adapt, you evolve, you rise. You've stopped waiting for someone to come along and rescue you. You've become your own savior, your own sanctuary, your own steady ground. You hold space for your sadness without letting it consume you. You celebrate your joy without waiting for it to be taken. You don't need to be fixed. You're not broken. You're becoming. You're blooming. You're unfolding in ways the world may not always understand, but your soul knows, and that's enough. You begin to feel the shift, not in grand moments, but in the soft ones. The ones where you respond differently than you used to. When a familiar trigger arises, and instead of lashing out or shutting down, you breathe. You check in with yourself. You notice the old urge to run, to please, to fix, and instead you stay. You stay with the feeling. You stay with your body. You stay with your truth. And in that staying, something sacred unfolds. You realize that growth doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like softness, like a pause, like choosing presence over pattern, like choosing you. You no longer rush your mornings just to keep up with the world. You rise slowly, stretch gently, and let your first words be kind. You don't check your phone before you check your breath. You don't invite the chaos of the world into your mind before anchoring in your own peace. You sip your coffee while the sun rises and let gratitude swell in your chest. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are awake, you are here, and that is enough. You feel your aliveness in the stillness, in the ordinary, in the uncelebrated. And it is in that simplicity that life becomes rich. You're no longer seeking loud validation. You don't need everyone to see your path to believe you're on the right one. You've let go of the idea that external confirmation is required for internal truth. You no longer announce every step or share every detail. You move quietly, intentionally, deeply, because now the journey is sacred. It belongs to you. And not everyone deserves access to your becoming. Not everyone has the capacity to witness your evolution without projecting their own fears onto it. So you walk wisely, you share selectively, and you protect the space where your growth lives. And you've grown in ways that are hard to explain, in ways that don't show up in photos, in ways that can't be measured by milestones. You've grown in your ability to sit with discomfort, to witness your own pain without running from it, to love yourself through the confusion, the doubt, the fear. You've grown in your ability to return to yourself after falling out of alignment, to come back, not with shame, but with compassion, with gentleness, with grace. You've learned that returning is the real work. That wholeness is not a destination, but a practice. You no longer give your energy to what drains you. You've learned the difference between being needed and being used, between being appreciated and being taken for granted. You don't call it love when it costs your peace. You don't stay where you feel unseen, unheard, unheld. You don't cling to familiarity just because it's comfortable. You've made peace with solitude, and now you're no longer afraid of leaving what no longer serves you. You don't abandon yourself to keep the peace. You are the peace. You stop hoping people will change just to keep them close. You love, but you let go. You care, but you don't cling. You walk away, not because you've stopped loving, but because you've started loving yourself more deeply. And that self-love, it's not loud. It's not about affirmations or bubble baths, though those can be part of it. It's about showing up for yourself when it's hard, about making choices that align with your truth, about learning to sit with discomfort without turning on yourself. It's the voice inside that says, I know this hurts, but I've got you. It's the steadiness that remains when the rest of the world gets loud. It's the quiet knowing that you're worthy, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. You stop demanding certainty. You stop waiting for life to become predictable before you allow yourself to be happy. You begin to dance with the unknown, to laugh in the in-between, to make peace with the mystery, because now you trust yourself to handle whatever comes. You've walked through storms and still found beauty. You've fallen and learned how to rise. You've broken and found the courage to gather your pieces with grace. That's strength, not the kind the world always sees, but the kind that lives in your bones. You start creating from your soul. You write, you sing, you build, not for success, but for expression, for healing, for joy. You stop asking if it's good enough. You start asking, does this feel true? You stop chasing validation. You let your authenticity be the reward. And slowly you begin to attract opportunities in people who see you. Not the mask, not the role, but you. And when that happens, you don't flinch. You don't question if you're worthy. You receive. You allow. You say thank you. And when the doubts return, as they always do, you meet them with compassion. You don't believe every fearful thought. You don't spiral into shame. You hold yourself like someone you love. You remind yourself of the truth. You return, not to perfection, but to presence. Again and again, you return. And that returning, it becomes your practice, your prayer, your path. You no longer fear falling behind. You know now that everyone's path is different. You no longer measure your progress by someone else's pace. You've stopped living on borrowed timelines. You've created your own. One where rest is sacred, where softness is strength, where being is enough. You've stopped chasing happiness. You've started embodying joy. Not the kind that comes from everything going right, but the kind that comes from being aligned with your truth, from waking up and knowing you're living with integrity, from choosing yourself again and again. You are no longer who you used to be, and you don't mourn her. You honor her. You thank her. She carried you. She protected you. She did the best she could, but now she can rest because you've taken the lead with tenderness, with truth, with trust. And that trust, it will carry you forward. There's a shift that happens when you stop trying to prove your worth and start living like you've already claimed it. It doesn't show up in fireworks or celebration. It shows up in the way you breathe when no one is watching, in the way you let yourself take up space without apology, in the way you finally stop rushing into rooms trying to be what others need and start arriving as yourself. And when that shift happens, it's not dramatic, it's holy. Because for the first time, you are no longer at war with your own reflection. For the first time, you've stopped asking others to tell you who you are. You know now. You feel it in your body. This new way of being. The way your shoulders no longer hunch in submission. The way your voice doesn't tremble with fear of judgment. The way your steps feel more grounded, more purposeful. You're no longer walking through life like you're trying not to be seen. You're walking through it like you belong. Because you do. You always did. It just took you time to believe it. And in that believing, there is a power. Not the kind that dominates or controls, but the kind that listens, holds, and radiates. You stop chasing love that doesn't honor your presence. You stop craving attention from people who only show up when it's convenient. You no longer tolerate the kind of relationships that leave you questioning your worth. You don't beg to be chosen anymore. You choose yourself. And when someone can meet you in that choice, in that clarity, in that softness, that's when love feels real. That's when it stops being performance and becomes peace. You're not looking for someone to complete you. You're not asking for someone to rescue you. You're simply saying, meet me in my wholeness. And if they can't, you're willing to walk away. And walking away, it doesn't feel like failure anymore. It feels like freedom. You don't see endings as proof that you're unlovable. You see them as redirections back to yourself. You've come to understand that healing doesn't mean avoiding pain. It means meeting it with awareness, feeling it all the way through. Not to wallow, but to witness. Not to drown, but to learn how to swim in your own depths. You allow the tears. You allow the silence. You allow the process. You know now that pain isn't a punishment. It's an initiation, a teacher, a message. And you no longer turn away. You turn toward, with open hands, with an open heart. You let love find you differently now, not through chasing, not through convincing, but through alignment, through showing up as yourself, fully, freely, without apology. You stop overcompensating. You stop bending your truth to keep someone. You stop holding your breath in relationships, hoping not to be too much. You know now that the right love won't ask you to shrink. The right love will stretch with you, grow with you, evolve with you. You don't beg to be chosen, you choose you. And the people meant for you will find you in your authenticity, not your performance. You begin to live in your body differently. You touch your own skin like it's sacred. You no longer see your body as something to battle. You honor it. You feed it with intention. You rest it without guilt. You move it with joy. You listen to its cues without demanding it function like a machine. You stop chasing an image and start cultivating a relationship. You're learning to be at home within yourself. And that changes how you show up in the world, not as someone seeking refuge, but as someone who carries it within. You find beauty in your boundaries, not just in setting them, but in living by them. You stop explaining your number. You stop apologizing for your limits. You stop second-guessing your needs. You understand now that your boundaries are not barriers to love. They're the blueprint for how you love yourself. They teach others how to love you too. And those who resist them, they were never honoring the real you to begin with. You don't take it personally. You let it clarify. You let it cleanse. You've become more patient with yourself. You don't rush your healing anymore. You don't demand perfection. You hold space for your process. You recognize that some days showing up means doing less, saying no, lying on the floor and breathing deeply. You don't judge your softness. You don't label your rest as weakness. You know that your worth is not found in your productivity. It's found in your presence, in your honesty, in your willingness to meet yourself exactly where you are. You don't perform joy anymore. You feel it, not because everything's figured out, but because you stopped resisting the moment. You let yourself laugh loudly. You let your body move when music plays. You let your smile be unfiltered, your playfulness be unpracticed. You remember what it's like to feel free without needing a reason. You create space for joy, not as a reward but as a right, as a reminder that you are allowed to feel good, that your life can hold pleasure even in the midst of pain. And when the doubt returns, when the old voices whisper that you're behind, that you're not enough, that you're still too much, you don't believe them like you used to. You hear them, but you don't hand them the microphone. You place your hand on your heart and say, "We've come too far to forget now." You ground yourself in your truth, in your progress, in the knowing that you are not the same person who used to believe those stories. You're writing new ones now, with softness, with sovereignty. You live more fully now, not because you've reached the summit, but because you've learned to love the path, to walk slowly, to pause often, to notice the sky, the birdsong, the way your breath feels when you exhale with intention. You're no longer waiting for some grand moment to start living. You know now that life is happening here, in the small things, in the quiet choices, in the way you love yourself over and over again, without needing permission. And that love, it's no longer conditional. You don't only love yourself when you're succeeding. You don't only celebrate yourself when you're polished. You love the mess, the vulnerability, the sacred unraveling. You love the version of you that's still learning, still softening, still shedding the armor. You love her especially because she's the one who never gave up. She's the one who kept showing up. She's the one who chose healing, even when it meant breaking open. And that love, it's no longer conditional. You don't only love yourself when you're succeeding. You don't only celebrate yourself when you're polished. You love the mess, the vulnerability, the sacred unraveling. You love the version of you that's still learning, still softening, still shedding the armor. You love her especially because she's the one who never gave up. She's the one who kept showing up. She's the one who chose healing, even when it meant breaking open. You are no longer who you used to be, and that's not something to mourn. That's something to honor, to celebrate. You've outgrown what once confined you. You've evolved beyond what once defined you, and now you stand in the light of your own becoming, quietly, powerfully, freely. You begin to realize that you don't need to burn down everything you were to become who you are meant to be. You don't need to destroy the past to heal the present. You can hold your history with reverence, not because every moment was right, but because every moment brought you here. You stop looking back with regret and start looking back with understanding. You see the younger version of yourself, trying so hard to get it right, to be loved, to stay safe, and you no longer criticize her for not knowing better. You hold her gently, you thank her. You love her for surviving the way she knew how, and in doing so, you finally set her free. You stop treating healing like a race. You stop trying to get over it just to move forward. You realize that integration takes time, that not every lesson arrives with a clean ending, that some things ache even after they're resolved. You allow that ache. You stop interpreting pain as failure. You stop expecting progress to look like happiness. Sometimes progress is crying on the floor, but not judging yourself for it. Sometimes it's choosing silence instead of explaining. Sometimes it's leaving the text unread, the call unanswered, the door closed. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening. You start speaking directly to your own soul. You are more honest now, not just in words, but in energy. You don't enter rooms where your light isn't welcome. You don't pretend to be okay when you're unraveling inside. You don't offer yes when you mean no. You are learning to honor your feelings in real time, not after they've exploded, but while they're whispering. You check in with yourself throughout the day. How am I feeling? What do I need? Not because it's trendy, but because it's sacred. Because this self-relationship is the foundation for everything else in your life. And from that foundation, you start choosing differently. You choose people who feel like ease, like safety, like home. You let go of the idea that love has to be hard to be real. You release the belief that connection must be earned through sacrifice. You stop trying to fix people in order to be worthy of keeping them. You no longer seek love through rescuing. You don't want to be someone's salvation. You want to be someone's companion, side by side, not above or below. You want love where your softness isn't questioned, where your silence isn't mistaken for distance, where your truth is not a threat, but a welcome. And when you don't find that, you don't beg, you don't plead, you don't contort, you simply bow out, lovingly, peacefully, with your dignity intact, because now you understand that your peace is more important than being understood, that your truth matters more than fitting in, that no connection is worth losing yourself. You are no longer available for dynamics that require your absence to maintain the illusion of harmony. You choose truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You choose peace, even when it means being alone. You are learning to be alone in a way that feels nourishing, not punishing. You no longer fill the space with noise just to avoid your thoughts. You light candles for no one but yourself. You dance without an audience. You cook meals like acts of devotion. You rest like it's your birthright. You don't wait for someone to witness your joy. You witness it. You validate it. You let solitude become your sanctuary, your teacher, your mirror. In the quiet, you meet parts of yourself you forgot existed, and they greet you like old friends, like truth returning home. You don't chase anymore. Not people, not outcomes, not worth. You let life unfold as it's meant to. You set your intentions, yes, but you also release your grip. You let go of the need to control the how and when. You stop micromanaging the universe. You trust that what is meant for you will find its way. You trust that detours are not disasters, that delays are not denials, that sometimes the deepest miracles are born in the moments where nothing seems to be happening. You've learned to rest in the unknown, not as a place of fear, but as a space of possibility. And in this spaciousness, creativity returns. Not forced, not scheduled, not polished, but raw, messy, alive. You write without wondering who will read it. You draw without worrying if it's good. You create for the joy of creating. You remember that expression is not about perfection, it's about presence. You let your art be a reflection of your aliveness. Not a product, not a performance, a prayer, a process. You create because you're awake to your own being, because your soul speaks in color and rhythm and sound. You are softer now, not because you've become less, but because you've let go of the need to always be hard. You don't armor up the way you used to. You don't brace for attack in every interaction. You allow yourself to be seen, flaws and all. You allow your voice to tremble, your hands to shake. You don't fear your sensitivity. You honor it. You recognize it as a superpower, a way to move through the world with empathy, with depth, with grace. You don't hide your heart anymore. You lead with it, even when it breaks. And when it breaks, you don't collapse. You don't disappear. You stay. You sit with the ache. You let it move through you. You cry without apology. You grieve without timeline. You let your emotions have their season, and when they pass, you rise. Not the same, but deeper, stronger, wiser. Not because you avoided the pain, but because you faced it. Because you loved yourself through it. Because you proved to your own soul that you are a safe place to land. You no longer need every day to be perfect. You're okay with mess, with inconsistency, with not having all the answers. You find magic in the small things, the quiet coffee, the unexpected laughter, the way your body exhales when you say no without guilt. You're no longer chasing a life that looks good from the outside. You're building one that feels right on the inside, one that's quiet but full, simple but sacred. You've stopped abandoning yourself for others. You've stopped negotiating your worth. You've stopped editing your essence. And in that refusal, you found freedom, not the kind that's loud or celebrated, but the kind that lives in your bones. The kind that wakes you up each morning with a soft, steady voice that says, "This is who we are now." And who you are now is someone who has returned. Returned to your truth. Returned to your center. Returned to the knowing that you were never broken, only buried. And now you rise. Not in spite of the journey, but because of it. Every scar, every silence, every step has brought you here. To this breath, to this moment, to this becoming. And that is more than enough. There comes a time when you no longer measure your progress by the loudness of your triumphs, but by the softness of your presence. not by how far you've reached outward, but by how deeply you've returned inward. You stop looking for the finish line, and instead you look for rhythm, for the quiet, sacred flow that has always been there underneath the noise. You begin to understand that healing isn't a peak you climb to, it's a home you come back to. And coming home is not an event, it's a practice. A gentle return to self again and again, without punishment, without shame. You stop asking life to be different and start asking yourself how deeply you can live it as it is. You stop fighting against the waves and start learning how to float with them. You stop reaching for the future as an escape from the present. Instead, you breathe into this moment with all its imperfections, with all its beauty, with all its heartbreak. You begin to trust that you can hold both, that you can hold grief and gratitude, that you can hold longing and contentment, that you can hold the aching truth of what didn't happen and the quiet joy of what's happening now. You find yourself noticing things you used to rush past, the way the sky changes color at dusk, the sound of your footsteps on a quiet path, the smell of rain before it even falls. These little details, they were always there. You were just too busy to see them, too wrapped up in proving something, chasing something, fixing something. But now you've slowed down. You've started listening. And in that listening, you've started remembering. Not with your mind, but with your whole being. You've remembered what it means to belong, not to a place or a person, but to yourself. You no longer expect others to meet needs you've learned how to meet within. You no longer look for someone to complete you because you've stopped seeing yourself as incomplete. You don't beg for crumbs of love from tables where you've never felt full. You don't settle for half presence when you know the fullness of being seen. You stop blaming yourself for what others couldn't give you. You stop chasing closure from people who were never capable of offering it. You learn to give it to yourself, not as a consolation prize, but as an act of liberation. You don't wait for someone else to set you free. You walk out of the cage yourself slowly, step by step, with courage in your chest and softness in your eyes. You find peace in solitude, not as something you tolerate, but as something you treasure. You begin to see being alone not as loneliness, but as spaciousness. You fill that space with breath, with silence, with your own presence. You create moments that feel like love without needing anyone else to witness them. You wrap yourself in blankets and light candles just because it feels good.